Researchers using an underwater camera have discovered sponges, corals and creatures living on the sea floor of a little understood marine park in the Gulf of Carpentaria.
In September 2019, a fishing crew working the deep water off the coast of Australia hauled their net up from 800 meters and pulled something onto the deck that should not exist. It was alive. Armored plates ran down its back, 4 jointed limbs hung from its sides, and its eyes faced forward and tracked the men across the deck. Within days, what emerged from that water reached marine researchers at 3 separate institutions.
Suddenly, on the sonar screen was the shape of a giant shark. You can see the fin, the face. It was about 50, 60 feet long. And for a moment there, everybody on that ship just froze.
And every one of them reacted the same way. First disbelief, then a silence that has never broken. They studied it, sequenced its DNA, and could not say what it was. The night it happened, let me put you on that boat because the details matter. The vessel is the Endurance 3, a commercial trawler working out of Cairns, Queensland, running standard deep-water prawn routes through the Coral Sea, roughly 240 kilometers offshore. The date is September 14th, 2019. There are 5 men aboard. Captain Dale Forsyth, who has fished these waters since 1989, his first mate, Aaron Briggs, 2 deckhands, brothers, Liam and Connor Walsh.
Many people online started to speculate that it was our first evidence that there is a large shark out there, possibly Megalodon. Megalodon was an extinct, huge shark that existed from about 23 million years ago to about 3.5 million years ago.
And a contracted technician named Rory Slade, on board to service the hydraulic net hauling rig. An ordinary crew, an ordinary night. Work every one of them had done 1,000 times. Around 2 in the morning, the trawl net comes up from a depth of roughly 800 meters. Hold on to that number, because we come back to it. And when we do, it changes everything. The net comes up heavy, not snagged on a reef heavy, not the dead lurching weight of a debris field, just heavier than it should be. Forsyth tells investigators later that his first thought was the most boring one available, the one any experienced skipper reaches for. Waterlogged timber, maybe a chunk torn off a lost shipping container, something large and dead and ordinary. It was not timber. What comes over the side is about 2.4 meters long. That is just under 8 feet, for anyone still holding out against the metric system, which, fair enough. The first instinct on deck is to call it a ray or a skate because of that flat, drawn-out body. But the longer they look at it, the worse that fits. A ray is a disc. This is not a disc. Running the length of its back is a row of distinctly segmented plates, articulated, overlapping, like the armor down an armadillo's spine. Except this is organic, grown, not built. Then they see the limbs, and these are not fins. A ray's pectoral fins fan out to the sides like wings, and these are nothing like that. These are 4 jointed structures, 2 on each side, set at the midpoint of the body, and every man on that deck reaches independently for the same word: arms. Each one ends in something Liam Walsh, in his recorded statement to Queensland Fisheries, calls a cluster.
No label, block, broken off.
He says he does not have a better word for it. Not fingers, not claws, not tentacles, a cluster. The head, if it is a head, is narrow and tapered, and it has eyes. Real eyes, and they are not where they should be. Not set on the sides of the skull, the way a fish or a ray carries them, scanning a wide arc for threat. These face forward, and in biology, forward-facing eyes mean one very specific thing. They mean an animal that hunts by judging distance, an animal that locks on and pursues, predator eyes, and the thing is alive. Not thrashing, not fighting. It is clearly compromised by the change in pressure, the way anything is when you haul it up that fast, from that deep. But it is moving. The jointed appendages are cycling, slowly, the narrow head is turning, and Briggs says, the part that rattled him most was not the way it looked at all. I am quoting his statement directly. What unsettled him was the moment it turned its head toward the crew. He said it felt deliberate. He used the word considered. It dies on the deck about 20 minutes after it comes aboard. Briggs owns a decent camera for wildlife photography, and he uses it, close to 90 individual photographs before the body starts breaking down in the tropical heat. Forsyth makes a fast decision, save what you can. and they wrap sections of the body in the plastic sheeting they use to pack prawns and bury it in the vessel's onboard freezer. Nobody slept that night. What they saw. You need to understand who these men are before we go one more step, because the entire case rests on it. These are not excitable tourists on a whale-watching cruise who spotted a strand of kelp and talked themselves into a sea serpent. Dale Forsythe has spent over 30 years on commercial fishing boats in some of the most biologically loaded water on the planet. He has hauled up blanket octopuses, oarfish, frilled sharks, fragments of giant squid, and a whale shark that tangled itself in his net off Cape York in 2004. The man knows what strange marine life looks like. Strange marine life is, in a real sense, his entire professional life. The Walsh brothers grew up fishing, their father fished, their grandfather fished before him. Liam told investigators he had probably seen every common deep-water species in the Coral Sea dozens of times over. And I believe him, because that is what a life on those boats actually is. Here is the part that gets me.
To try and drive solutions and to be able to communicate our science knowledge to the public and to decision makers.
All 5 men gave independent statements when the Endurance 3 docked, and when you lay those statements down side by side, they are consistent, not identical. Identical would actually be the suspicious thing, because identical is what you get from people who rehearsed a story together. These are consistent the way real eyewitness accounts are consistent. They disagree on the small, peripheral stuff. The exact shade of the coloring, whether the limbs moved in a steady cycle or in pulses, how loud it was when the thing first hit the deck. But on everything structurally important, they line up exactly. The forward-facing eyes, the articulated plates, the 4 jointed appendages, the narrow tapering skull, the size, the deliberate turn of the head. There is a known phenomenon in marine biology circles called fisherman's inflation. It is the tendency for the size and the strangeness of an unusual catch to grow a little with every retelling. The thing was, this big quietly becomes, the thing was this big. You know exactly how it goes. Scientists who investigate unusual sightings are trained to expect it, to shave a sensible margin off the reported dimensions, and strip out the drama that naturally builds around a frightening night at sea. So, here is what makes the next detail land. The lead investigator from CSIRO, which is Australia's national science agency, reviewed the crew statements and wrote in her internal report that the accounts showed remarkably low inflation indicators. In plain language, after she had accounted for every normal way frightened people exaggerate, the core physical details still held together and still reinforced one another. That is the careful clinical language a scientist uses when she quietly believes what she is reading and is not yet ready to say so out loud. That report was never released publicly. I obtained a summary of it through a researcher who sat in on the initial CSIRO briefing, and I want you to hold on to that, because the silence around this case is about to become a character in its own right. The specimen. Before I take you into what those samples revealed, one quick thing, because it matters to me that you are actually here for it. If you want to keep following the cases the institutions quietly bury before anyone connects them together, take a second and subscribe. What came back from the labs is the exact reason I could not let this one go. When the Endurance 3 docks in Cairns on the morning of September 15th, 2019, Forsythe does the single thing that turns out to matter more than anything else he does that week. Before he calls Queensland Fisheries, before he calls anyone official at all, he calls a marine biologist he had met years earlier through a conservation tagging program. Her name is Dr. Patricia Holm, then based at James Cook University in Townsville. He trusts her. More to the point, he trusts that she will take him seriously instead of filing him away as a confused man chasing attention. He tells her what they caught. He sends her 3 of Briggs's photographs. Picture her on the other end of that. Holm said later that when she opened those 3 images, she sat at her desk for several minutes without moving. She ran through every identification she could pull from her training and her 18 years of field experience, one after another, and not one of them fit. So she told Forsythe to freeze everything, touch nothing, and she got in her car and drove to Cairns that same day. That is not a casual response. That is a working scientist dropping everything because some part of her already knew. What she manages to recover is a partial specimen, The tropical heat had already pushed parts of the body past any useful recovery, even with the freezer. What survives is this: 2 segments of the articulated dorsal plating, a section of one appendage with the cluster still attached at the end, tissue samples from the body wall, and fluid drawn from the body cavity as it broke down. It is not the whole animal, it is not even most of it, but it is real, physical, sequenceable material, the kind of thing every cryptid story in history has always conveniently lacked. For once, there was something to put under a microscope. Holmes splits the samples between 3 separate institutions.
Witness environmental devastation firsthand. What once had looked like an endless underwater utopia is now riddled with bleached coral reefs and massive dead zones.
James Cook University's own marine biology facility, CSIRO's Australian National Fish Collection in Hobart, and an independent genetic sequencing laboratory in Brisbane. 3 labs. 3 separate chances for someone to come back and say, "Relax, it is a known species, the men misread it in the dark." That is not what happened. The tissue analysis confirmed the obvious part first: it was biological. Then it confirmed the part that was not obvious at all. The cellular structure matched nothing in the available reference databases for known marine species. CSIRO flagged mitochondrial markers that corresponded to no classified vertebrate or invertebrate in their entire system. And the Brisbane lab, which is the detail I keep coming back to, was handed the sample completely blind. They were told nothing about where it came from or what anyone believed it might be. They sequenced the sample completely cold, and they reported back that their results were, in their words, inconsistent and anomalous, and warranted further investigation. That further investigation has never been publicly reported. Make of that what you will. The official silence. I want to be fair here, because being fair actually makes this worse, not better. The scientific community did not ignore the Endurance 3. They engaged with it. They simply engaged with it in the most cautious, hedged, institutionally self-protective language you have ever heard, which, if you have spent any time around an institution, you recognize instantly as the particular sound people make when they have seen something they are not ready to talk about. Queensland Fisheries put out a short statement in October 2019. It acknowledged that an unusual specimen had been recovered by a commercial vessel, that samples were under analysis, that the Coral Sea holds significant unexplored biodiversity, and that unusual catches happen in deep water trawling. Every word of that is true. Not one word of it comes within a mile of what was actually on that deck. It is a statement built to be accurate and tell you nothing, and once you hear that tone, you hear it everywhere in this case. CSIRO issued nothing public at all. Their internal correspondence, portions of which have circulated among researchers, is written to describe a situation without describing it, morphologically distinct from known taxa, requiring further taxonomic evaluation. Those are not the phrases you use when you think a crew of panicked fishermen misread a known animal in the dark. Those are the phrases you use when you are genuinely lost, and you do not want a public spectacle building around your uncertainty before you have anything resembling an answer. And then there is Dr. Holm. She is the figure who keeps surfacing all the way through this. And she is also the one who has gone the quietest. She gave a single interview in 2022, and then she closed the door and has kept it closed. When she did talk, she chose every word like it cost her money. She said she believed the specimen was real and significant. She said she was frustrated, and you can hear it in the recording. This is a scientist watching something genuinely extraordinary get slow-walked into a drawer and forgotten. And then she said, "The thing I have not been able to shake since." The problem, she said, was never that the institutions did not believe the evidence. The problem was that believing it created more questions than anyone had the infrastructure to answer. Sit with that for a second. They are not dismissing this thing. They are drowning in it. There is a world of difference between we looked and there was nothing there, and we looked and we do not have a box big enough to hold what we found. This is the second one. And that box being too small is about to become the entire problem. What it isn't. Here is how you go about killing a mystery animal. You try, methodically, patiently, to fit it into everything you already know, candidate by candidate, until either one of them fits or you run out of candidates.
That we start to talk about either Australians can't eat wild-caught seafood or Australians can, but there shouldn't be a select group of Australians.
So that is exactly what they did. There were 4 serious ones. The first was the Chimera family, sometimes called ghost sharks. These are deep-water cartilaginous fish with body plans strange enough to look genuinely alien to an untrained eye. Elongated snouts, oddly placed fins, pale, ghostly coloring. They live in the Coral Sea. The largest species reach about 1.5 meters, but 2.4 meters of jointed limbs, forward-facing eyes, and articulated dorsal plating is not a chimera. It is not even close. The second was an undescribed deep-water skate. Skates can get genuinely large. Their body plans are odd enough to surprise experienced fishermen. And yes, new skate species do turn up in Australian deep-water surveys. But skates are flat. They do not have forward-facing eyes. They do not grow jointed limb-like structures halfway down the body. And the cellular structure of known skate tissue does not throw the anomalous genetic markers the Brisbane lab reported. A big undescribed skate would have been a quiet, almost boring answer, the kind everyone secretly hoped for. The tissue refused to give it to them. The third was a large benthic cephalopod, a bottom-dwelling relative of the octopus, or cuttlefish, possibly an undescribed genus. Honestly, this is the sensible place to start, because cephalopods are extraordinary. Some deep-water species have forward-facing eyes, and the ocean has embarrassed us with cephalopods often enough that ruling nothing out is just good sense. The octopus alone rewrote half of what we assumed was possible for a mind without a backbone. But cephalopods do not have articulated bony or cartilaginous plating. They do not have a vertebrate cellular structure, and the tissue from the Endurance 3 specimen came back looking more consistent with a vertebrate body plan than an invertebrate one. Read that sentence again, slowly, with everything else in this case sitting beside it. A vertebrate, with jointed limbs at the midpoint of its body, hauled up cold from 800 meters down. That is the sentence that quietly turned a strange catch into a problem nobody wanted to put their name next to. The fourth candidate was raised reluctantly in a single internal email thread that was shared with me. The possibility of a previously unknown member of the lobe-finned fish lineage. The coelacanth belongs to that group, the fish believed extinct for 65 million years until a living one turned up off the coast of South Africa in 1938. Lobe-finned fish have fleshy, jointed appendages instead of the thin ray fins of most modern fish. They are the evolutionary cousins of the lineage that eventually dragged itself onto land and became every terrestrial vertebrate that has ever existed, including, eventually, us. I am not telling you the Endurance 3 crew caught a living lobe-finned fish. I want to be careful about that. What I am telling you is that the people whose actual job it is to rule that possibility out have not, as of the time I am recording this, done it. The deep sea problem. Step back with me for a second, because this is the part that changes how you weigh everything you have just heard. Most people walk around quietly assuming we basically know what is in the ocean. We have explored it for centuries. We have sonar, submersibles, satellites. How unknown could it really be? The honest answer is staggering.
Fish like the jewfish, the WA jewfish, occur nowhere else in the world. It's kind of the ocean's equivalent to the quokka. We're at risk of overfishing that fish.
Roughly 80% of Earth's oceans are unmapped, unexplored, and unobserved at any meaningful resolution, and the deep water off Australia's northeastern shelf is among the worst surveyed of all of it. The Coral Sea's basin drops past 9,000 meters in places, and brand new species come out of Australian water every single year. Not minor reshuffles of known animals, entirely new ones. In 2022, a single survey of the Cocos, Keeling Islands, came back with over 800 potentially new species from one expedition. And here's the part that should genuinely stop you cold. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we have of the floor of the Coral Sea. Now, go back to the number I told you to hold. The Endurance 3's net came up from 800 meters. That is deep enough that commercial boats almost never survey it systematically. Deep enough for permanent darkness, for pressure-adapted life we barely understand. Deep enough to have been effectively invisible to science for almost all of human history. So, when someone tells you an unidentified species down there is implausible, what they are really telling you, without realizing it, is that they have forgotten how little we have actually seen. And here is the thing nobody had put together until now. The Endurance 3 was not the first. A pattern emerges. Work through the old fisheries reports, the maritime incident logs, and the oral history of the coastal communities of far north Queensland. And a pattern starts to surface. One that, as far as I can tell, nobody had formally connected before. Each one sat in a different filing system, logged by a different agency, decades apart. So no single person ever saw them stacked together. Put them in one place, in order, and the resemblance gets very hard to unsee. And it runs back a lot further than you would think. Start with the oldest thread of all, the one almost nobody remembers. 1918, a crew of experienced lobster fishermen working the deep water off Australia's eastern coast came back to shore one afternoon and refused to ever go out again. That is nearly everything that survives of it. No preserved description, no specimen, no photograph, just the refusal itself. And a century of retelling that sanded the rest of the detail away. On its own, it is almost nothing. But notice the shape, because it is the same shape we keep hitting, in the same stretch of water. A seasoned crew, the kind of men who do not spook, who knew that sea cold, deciding they would simply never return to it. That is where the sequence begins. It does not end there. 1994. A prawn trawler operating out of Thursday Island in the Torres Strait hauls up a creature its captain records in his incident log as resembling, and this is his own line, "No fish I have encountered in 30 years of this work." He describes a flattened body, unusual appendages, and what he calls armor plating across the upper surface.
3 tonnes caught by the commercial sector and 90 by the recreational, and they're saying that they're paying the price for, overfishing that has been done by another sector, by the recreational sector, which will be allowed to fish again in 20 months.
The Queensland Fisheries Incident Log lists the report as filed and unresolved. No follow-up investigation was ever recorded. A captain with 3 decades on the water tells you he has never seen anything like it, and the system files the paperwork and moves on. 2007. A recreational fishing vessel, about 180 kilometers off Mackay, reports a large unidentified animal surfacing right alongside the boat for around 4 minutes before it slips back under. The witnesses describe forward-facing eyes and a body that matched no whale, no shark, no large fish they could name. Maritime safety. Queensland takes the report and files it. Again, no follow-up. Recreational witnesses are easy to wave off, and that one got waved off too. 2013, a researcher running a deep-water ROV survey for a mining company in the Coral Sea Basin records footage of a large benthic organism with, in her own survey language, a morphologically unusual body plan, inconsistent with known deep-water fauna at this depth. The footage was classified as company property. Freedom of information requests to obtain it have gone nowhere. A mining company, a research vessel, a hard drive nobody will open. Whatever is on it, someone decided it was easier to lock away than to explain. And then there is the source that mainstream science was embarrassingly slow to take seriously. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of far north Queensland carry oral traditions describing large creatures in the deep coastal water, traditions that predate European contact by thousands of years. The Yithiwara and Gudung peoples of the Cape York Peninsula have specific named categories for unusual deep-water animals that correspond to nothing in the formal biological record. These are not vague monster stories told around a fire. They are precise, detailed descriptions, carried down through generations of people whose survival depended on knowing this water accurately. Getting it wrong meant going hungry, or worse. These were people reading that water for a living, the same as foresight, just a few thousand years earlier. In 2018, an elder from the Gudung community, speaking to a researcher from AIATSIS, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, described creatures from beyond the shelf edge, using a term that translates roughly as the plated ones. He described them as rarely seen, encountered only when fishing gear goes unusually deep, and identifiable by 2 features above all: their forward-looking eyes, and their jointed sides. That interview was recorded in 2018, a full year before the Endurance 3, by a man who had never heard of the Endurance 3, and could not have, because it had not happened yet. I am just going to let that sit there for a moment. What they won't say. There is a version of this story where the silence is the entire story, where the missing press release and the careful language are nothing more than ordinary bureaucratic caution.
Fish aren't like humans, they're not like us. As they get older and bigger, they just produce more and more eggs. And so the West Australian jewfish, by the time it gets to 80 centimetres, it's producing maybe 15 or 20 times more.
The slow, honest grind of scientific verification. Nothing strange about any of it. That version is comfortable. It lets everyone off the hook. And for a while I wanted it to be true. I took that version seriously. I genuinely did, because I do not want to be the guy who decides his conclusion first and then bends the evidence to fit it. But I have spent several months now talking to people close to this case. Researchers who sat in on the early briefings, a graduate student who worked under one of the scientists who received samples, a marine biologist with no direct connection to any of it who has seen the photographs that circulate privately in research circles. And not one of them will go on the record by name, not one. The consistency of that refusal is, all by itself, a data point worth writing down. Scientists do not quietly close ranks over a known animal. They close ranks over something they cannot file, something that would cost them credibility to claim before they can prove it. What they tell me, in various forms, comes out the same way every time. The specimen is real. The photographs are not manipulated. The tissue samples are not contaminated or mislabeled. The genetic anomalies are not a lab error. Something genuine was caught in that net. And the reason the official response has been so muted is not that anyone decided it was unimportant. It is that nobody has decided anything at all. Standing up in public to announce that you are holding physical evidence of an unclassified vertebrate from Australian deep water, while being unable to tell anyone what it is, creates a category of problem that scientific institutions are simply not built to manage. One of them, a marine taxonomist with a substantial publication record in deep water species identification, put it in a way I keep replaying in my head. The problem, he said, is not the finding. Unusual findings happen all the time. That is the job. The problem is that everything about this specimen pushes against the categories we use to organize what we know. And then, choosing his words with very obvious care, he said, the specimen does not behave taxonomically. What this means. So let me tell you what I think is actually going on, and why I think it reaches well past this one strange night. The deep coral sea, like the deep floor of most of the world's ocean basins, has been cut off from the surface for spans of time you cannot really hold in your head. The canyons off that shelf have been continuously submerged for tens of millions of years. Permanent darkness, crushing pressure. The rules of surface biology only half applying. Evolution, down there, running experiments that no human being has ever watched. We know this in principle. Every deep water survey ever conducted has come back with things that strain the existing system.
If we can't find something viable before April, it's sort of all over, and then we're left without a house and boats that are now worth nothing in a processing facility that nobody can use.
The whole history of deep-sea biology is a history of being confidently wrong about what is down there, being shown the physical evidence, revising the textbook, and then being wrong all over again about whatever lies deeper still. What the crew brought up in September 2019 looks like one more entry in that long, humbling list. An animal from a depth, and possibly a lineage, our taxonomy was never built to hold. Whether it is a surviving branch of an ancient group, a wildly divergent offshoot of a known modern one, or something else entirely, nobody has answered. Not because the question is unanswerable, because the resources and the nerve to answer it in public have not yet been pointed at it. The DNA work is incomplete. The specimen is half degraded. The photographs, as good as they are, were taken on a fishing deck at 2 a.m. The chain of evidence is imperfect, the way it almost always is when a discovery happens out in the real, uncooperative world instead of a clean laboratory. But what exists is not nothing. It is substantial. Multiple independent analyses from credible institutions, historical reports stretching back decades, oral traditions from people who have lived beside that water for thousands of years. Put it all in one pile, and it is heavier than almost any unsolved case I have ever covered. And it is being handled by the people closest to it with a seriousness that makes the public quiet look loud. The creature is not in the net anymore. What is in the net now is a question. How much of our own planet have we actually looked at? How confidently do we describe oceans we have barely touched? How fast do we wave off the fisherman, the elder, the witness, the person whose knowledge comes from a lifetime in the water instead of a wall of framed credentials? Jeremy Wade spent decades proving rivers hid creatures stranger than science wanted to admit. And the ocean, 71% of this planet, hides far more than any river ever could. I will be honest with you, I started this almost ready to dismiss the whole thing. A weird catch, tired men, the dark. I was wrong to lean that way. And that instinct to dismiss has a real cost, because every single time a credible witness reports something that does not fit our neat boxes and gets told, politely or not, that they must be mistaken, we lose data. We shut a door on it before we have properly looked through it. 5 men on a trawler off the Queensland coast saw something real on their deck in the early hours of September 14th, 2019. They documented it. They saved what they could. They reported it through the proper channels, and they told the truth about what they saw. The institutions that received that truth still have not told the rest of us what they made of it. I think they should. I think at this point we can handle it. If this one cracks something open for you, subscribe and stay close, because I am chasing more of these. The cases the institutions quietly file and hope nobody ever connects, and I do not want you to miss the next one. Then tell me down in the comments. If you have spent time on the water off Australia and seen something out there you could never explain, I read every single one, and I want to hear yours. The water is deeper than you think, and a lot less empty.